Wait, before you blame the sun again or the cream you just bought last week, just pause for a moment. Look at your skin the way you usually do, but this time a little more carefully. The same areas that haven't changed in months. The patches that seem slightly darker, slightly uneven, almost like your skin is holding on to something. You've tried different products, maybe vitamin C, maybe sunscreen, maybe a routine you followed consistently for weeks, and yet it still returns. So the question becomes uncomfortable. If you're doing everything right on the surface, why does your skin behave like something underneath hasn't changed at all? Because what if pigmentation isn't just about sunlight or genetics or skincare mistakes? What if your skin isn't damaged? But trying to tell you something? Pigmentation today isn't rare anymore. It's almost expected. People in their 20s noticing dullness. People in their 30s seeing patches that weren't there before. Even those who eat relatively clean, exercise regularly, and follow skincare routines still feel like their skin is slightly off. Not terrible, not alarming, but not clear either. And the strange part is that it doesn't always match effort. Someone spends money on serums, sunscreen, facials, and still sees uneven tone, while someone else does almost nothing and their skin looks balanced. So naturally, the focus stays external. Maybe it's the wrong product, maybe it's not strong enough, maybe it needs more consistency. But very rarely does the question shift inward because modern life quietly adds layers that don't show up immediately. Processed foods that seem harmless, like chips, packaged biscuits, sugary drinks, refined oils, and frequent takeout meals, don't just affect weight. They influence how the body processes internal load. Sleep becomes irregular, with late nights, scrolling, and inconsistent wake times. Stress isn't always dramatic, but it's constant, low-level, always present. Meals are rushed. Digestion becomes passive instead of active, and over time something subtle begins to build. Not a disease, not something obvious, but a kind of internal congestion. So what if the issue isn't what you're applying, but what your body is processing? The skin is often treated like an isolated layer, something you fix directly. But biologically, it's more like a surface where internal activity becomes visible. Not everything shows up there, but when something does, it's rarely random. The body isn't designed to prioritize perfect skin. It prioritizes survival, energy balance, and internal stability. Appearance comes later. So when internal systems are slightly overwhelmed, the body doesn't panic. It adapts, and sometimes that adaptation becomes visible on the skin. Pigmentation, in this sense, isn't always a flaw. It can be a pattern, a response, a signal. Not dramatic enough to feel like a problem, but persistent enough to feel like something isn't fully right. Inside the body, there is a system constantly, working in the background, processing, filtering, converting, regulating. Often unnoticed until it becomes slightly overloaded. This is where the idea of the liver as a processing center begins to make sense. Not in a dramatic detox narrative, but in a simple, everyday way. The liver is constantly working with what you eat, what you absorb, what your body produces. Hormones are part of that. Metabolic byproducts are part of that. Even the subtle leftovers from stress and inflammation are part of that ongoing process. It doesn't stop, and most of the time it manages everything quietly. But when inputs increase, when meals become heavier, more frequent, more processed, when sleep becomes inconsistent, when stress signals remain elevated, the workload doesn't disappear. It accumulates. Not enough to break the system, but enough to slow it down. And when processing becomes slightly inefficient, the body begins to redistribute its efforts. Hormonal balance can shift subtly. Estrogen, for example, relies on proper processing pathways, and when those pathways are slightly overwhelmed, the balance doesn't collapse, it just becomes less precise. Inflammation may increase, not dramatically, but enough to influence skin behavior. Oxidative stress may rise, not enough to feel, but enough to alter how cells respond. And slowly, the skin begins to reflect these internal shifts. Not immediately, but gradually. This is why pigmentation can feel so confusing. It's not always directly caused by one thing. It's often amplified by a combination of subtle internal patterns. This is also why surface solutions often feel incomplete. Creams can lighten the appearance, but they don't change the underlying signals, so the improvement feels temporary. And when it returns, it feels like failure. But it's not failure. It's incomplete understanding. External factors still matter. Sun exposure plays a role. Genetics influence how skin responds. Skin type determines sensitivity, but internal load can quietly amplify all of these. Two people with similar sun exposure may have completely different pigmentation responses depending on what's happening inside. So instead of choosing one cause over another, it becomes more useful to see it as a layered system. Within that system, reducing internal load becomes a meaningful direction, not as a cure, not as a quick fix, but as a way to support balance. This is where the idea of a 21-day reset begins to take shape. Not as something dramatic, but as something structured. A short window where the body is given slightly better conditions to process, regulate, and stabilize. In the first few days, the focus isn't on adding more, but on simplifying. Meals become lighter, more digestible. Warm, cooked foods replace cold and processed options. Hydration becomes steady instead of random. Sleep becomes slightly more consistent. Nothing extreme, just a gentle reduction in internal noise. As the days pass, the body begins to respond in small ways. Digestion feels more active, energy becomes more stable, and the constant heaviness some people feel begins to reduce. This is where gentle support can be introduced. Not as treatment, but as alignment. A simple ginger and fennel tea after meals, or warm water with lemon in the morning, can subtly support digestion and processing. Not because they are powerful, but because they are consistent. And consistency is what the body understands best. By the later phase of the reset, the focus shifts toward rhythm. Waking up at a similar time each day, getting a few minutes of natural sunlight in the morning, allowing the body's internal clock to recalibrate. Movement becomes light and intentional. A short walk after meals, a few gentle stretches, or simple yoga poses like child's pose or seated twists that support circulation and digestion. Sleep becomes deeper, not because it's forced, but because the body is less stimulated and more aligned with natural cycles. Within this flow, daily life doesn't feel restrictive. It feels simplified. Breakfast might be something warm and easy to digest, like oatmeal cooked with milk or water, topped with soaked almonds, a few raisins, and a pinch of cinnamon. Lunch becomes the main meal, with cooked vegetables like carrots, spinach, and zucchini, paired with lentils or light protein, and a portion of rice or flatbread. Dinner becomes lighter again. Perhaps a vegetable soup or lightly sautéed vegetables with herbs, eaten earlier in the evening to allow proper digestion before sleep. These are not strict rules, but patterns that support how the body naturally functions. Herbal support remains gentle and optional. Chamomile tea in the evening can help calm the system. Mint tea after meals may support digestion. Dandelion root tea is often associated with supporting natural processing pathways. None of these are cures and none of them are necessary, but they align with a slower, more supportive approach to internal balance. Movement, too, stays simple. A few minutes of yoga, light walking, or stretching is enough to support circulation without overwhelming the body. What often disrupts this process are not big mistakes, but small patterns repeated over time. Trying to do too much at once, expecting fast results, constantly switching between different methods, or approaching the body with urgency instead of patience. These patterns don't allow the body to stabilize, because the body doesn't respond to occasional intensity. It responds to repeated signals. And when those signals become calmer, more predictable, more aligned, the system begins to adjust. So when you look at pigmentation again, it may not feel like something to fight, but something to observe. Not something to eliminate immediately, but something to understand gradually, because your skin is not separate from your body. It is part of the conversation your body is having with itself. And sometimes, what looks like a surface issue is simply a message being expressed in the only way it can be seen. So instead of asking how to remove it, a different question begins to form. What is my body trying to process that it hasn't fully resolved yet? And in that shift, the entire approach changes, because your skin may not be the problem, it may be the messenger. And when the message is understood, the need to force change quietly disappears.